What do you get when you add exogenous tryptamines to the substrate of psilocybe cubensis mushrooms? Well, many different things depending on which exogenous tryptamine you choose to add. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Benjamin Moore, and I am a co-founder and co-executive director here at the Church of the Sacred Synthesis. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about doped mushrooms and how that affects the outputs of the compounds and what's going on inside the mushroom that enables us to essentially fertilize the substrate with different mediums and get different outputs. And so if this is your first time joining us, thank you. If you've watched some of these things before, thank you for returning. And just a couple housekeeping notes. On April 26th is going to be our monthly Light One meditation. So if you haven't attended one of these before, please feel free to join us and come as you are to the experience. You can work with our 5-MeO Light Wand sacrament as you wish, or come completely sober. It all is up to you. We encourage you to join us in our school community to find different ways to learn how to manage and expand your experience when working with psychedelics. And so you can find our school community at www.school.com/the sacred synthesis. And when you join there, you will find a myriad of educational courses and other opportunities to learn and expand your awareness around psychedelics and energy and ceremony and all these different aspects that support your journey overall. And within that community, you can find the calendar where we have many different opportunities to connect and interact with our community face to face. So without further ado, I will begin this presentation. So thank you again. So yeah, we're talking about doped mushrooms and what happens if you feed or when you feed exogenous tryptamines to the fruiting bodies, or excuse me, to the substrate of mushrooms. So the core concept here is that psilocybe cubensis produces psilocybin and psilocin through a defined four-enzyme biochemical pathway. Each enzyme performs one specific chemical transformation in sequence, and those enzymes do not exclusively recognize their native substrate, but they also have a tolerance for related molecules. So doping really equals introducing the exogenous tryptamine into the growing substrate. And if the molecule is structurally compatible with one or more of the enzymes, it will produce a compound that it could never make on its own. And so the output obviously depends on which enzymes the foreign molecule can use, which enzymes it bypasses. And an example of this is if you feed it DMT, it's already dimethylated, so it will skip the dimethyl or the methylation enzyme and the PSIM enzyme and the PSID enzyme because it's already methylated and it's already decarboxylated. And so then this moves into how efficiently the enzymes work on the modified ring structure. And so we'll talk a little about the four-enzyme cascade of events as it's inside the medium or the substrate of the mushroom. So, and then I'm going to talk a little here about what the enzymes actually are. So PSID enzyme is a decarboxylase enzyme. And what that does is it decarboxylates tryptophan into tryptamine. And obviously, when you feed it a preformed tryptamine, like dimethyltryptamine or 5-MeO tryptamine, it bypasses this enzyme. This enzyme isn't used, so it just kind of stays where it is and does its thing. And then we have the PSIH enzyme, which is the P450 monooxygenase enzyme, and that adds a hydroxyl group at the 4 position of the indole ring. And it's a rate limiting step, requires NADPH as an energy source to actually do the process. And it's a very critical determinant of doping success because that's what we're looking for. We're putting these tryptamines in so we can have them 4-hydroxylated. And this is the most important enzyme in the conversation. And the next in the line is PSIK. It's called a kinase enzyme, and that phosphorylates the 4-OH group using ATP. It produces a stable prodrug which can be protected for thousands of years, and it's confirmed to be flexible, so it accepts C5 substituted substrates. And then we have the PSIM, or the methyltransferase, and this adds 2 methyl groups to the terminal amines sequentially. So it methylates once, and then as this substrate stays, it will methylate again, so giving us dimethyltryptamine. And in some cases, they found uh, very promiscuous molecules that have trimethylated. And so we're not going to go too deep into the science of that at this juncture, but that's something that we'll perhaps bring forward to you in the future. And this is the most selective enzyme. It requires a phosphate group for substrate recognition, almost like a heat-seeking missile. So it's a phosphate-seeking enzyme. It needs to use as an attractor. And it's obviously bypassed entirely when the substrate is already methylated or dimethylated. And so in this conversation, it's so important because this isn't theoretical. In 1989, Joe Kingartz he discovered that if you add exogenous tryptamines to the substrate of a mushroom, it will produce a 4-hydroxylated version of that. And the most important compound that he created and produced and published journals on is DET. So DET is diethyltryptamine. It is structurally identical to DMT, but it carries 2 ethyl groups instead of 2 methyl groups. So it's slightly different. And because DET is already diethylated, PSID and PSIM are both bypassed. PSIH adds a 4-OH to DET, and PSIK adds a phosphate group. Same 2 steps as native, the native molecule or native tryptamine, and except this is already diethylated. And this was actually created much earlier in the 50s, which is very interesting how we're kind of like putting all these things together. And so in the 50s, Albert Hofmann and Franz Troxler created Ethocin and ethocybin, which is we'll say the lay name, I guess you would call it, of 4-HODET and 4-PODET. And then human clinical trials were conducted at the University of Göttingen in the 60s. And the compound here is a partial agonist at the 5-HT2A receptor. And what they found is the duration is approximately half that of psilocin or psilocybin. And the visual phenomenon, is still present, including geometric patterns, comparable psilocybin character, but clinical and anecdotal reports have been shown that this is about half as potent as classic or traditional psilocin or psilocybin. However, when adding DET to the substrate of a mushroom, they found that you can get up to 3.3% of 4-HODET by weight, which is significantly higher in potency than classic psilocin or psilocybin containing mushrooms. So there's a way here, it seems, to increase the potency, but also we're working with a half as potent experience. So, play with it as you will. And then moving on, so DMT as a doping substrate. An interesting conversation here because 4-HODMT is psilocin. And what that means is if we add DMT to the substrate of a growing mushroom, what will it do? What can it do with that? Well, it's going to follow its natural enzymatic process, meaning it's going to phosphorylate if that's what it wants to do, and it's going to hydroxylate, and it's going to add more of the primary ingredient and actually bypass 2 of the steps in the mushroom. So it will create a very efficient process. And what they found is that you can up the amount of psilocin and psilocybin to 3.3%. And after which you're going to get diminishing returns. So if you're doping your substrate with DMT, there's a point where if you add too much, it will actually reduce the potency because it creates a competition and suppresses the natural enzymes. And this is a very interesting approach because we can, with the right cofactors and proper measurements, we can actually get the maximum yield that the mushroom can produce and then stay there. But what we're recognizing in these types of growing processes is that sometimes the mushroom evolves. So one series or round of growing can yield a certain level of output, and then if you take that same mushroom and clone it, it can evolve. The clone can evolve, and the new cofactors and concentrations could be too much and cause a lower potency, or it could be less and cause a lower potency. So these are always things to consider when playing with natural compounds. Is these are life forms and they can shift and evolve based on the cofactor. So if you're let's just say very specific around the cofactors, you can control it pretty well. And yeah, it's a really low supplementation concentration, so it doesn't need very much to increase the potency. As you know, psilocin, the potency of the constituents are very low as far as by weight of the mushroom, so less than maybe 1%, and so it's very low. And let's see, and this confirms that PSIH can process dimethylated tryptamines when the ring is unsubstituted. So in the cascade of the molecular transformation, um, typically the dimethylation happens at the beginning, or excuse me, at the end. So when you are introducing a substituted tryptamine that already is dimethylated, there can be an argument made that it could make 4-hydroxylating or phosphorylating the tryptamine more complicated. But what they're finding is that doesn't cause any interference. So very interesting. And next up, I'd like to talk a little about, excuse me, 5-MeO-DMT. And so 5-MeO-DMT as a doping substrate it's obviously provided a very interesting journey of events. And so what we're saying is 5-MeO-DMT is already dimethylated. So PSID and PSIM are both bypassed. They're not needed here. And the cascade is reduced to 2 steps: hydroxylation and phosphorylation. And if PSIH succeeds at the C4 position, psilomethoxin is produced. And then if the PSIK succeeds at the 4 position, then psilomethoxibin is produced. And so, or 5-methoxypsilocybin. However you want to use that word, we'll call it psilomethoxin and psilomethoxibin. And so there's been some uncertainty on if it's possible that the 4-hydroxylate, excuse me. There's been some controversy around if it's possible that the PSIH enzyme will hydroxylate at the 4 position when the 5th position has been occupied. And what they've shown in similar experiments is that there's been a 5-methyl DMT, so 5-MeDMT, that was produced, and that was hydroxylated by the PSIH enzyme, the enzyme that is taken from the mushroom, successfully. And so because the MEO group is slightly larger than the ME group, there's been some controversy on if this is possible. However, in recent and in historical context, we're showing that there's evidence that this is possible, although perhaps at a lower yield. And so what we're saying is there is some cofactors at play here that can be optimized to increase the yield and increase the quality of the results. However, it is possible and is actually proven now. and there will be more of that coming into the future. And so, why this is important? Well, because it is also a tryptamine that has been introduced as an exogenous tryptamine into the mushroom substrate. And so, with that being said, is can this overcome the geometry of the molecule? And again, there's information on this coming forward into the future. And beyond just 5-MeO-DMT, I want to talk a little about the Colorado river toad. And so the Colorado river toad, or the Bufo alvarius, or now the newly recoined Encelius alvarius, has a high capacity, or excuse me, a high volume of 5-MeO-DMT in its exudate. But what it also has in its exudate is bufotenine, 5-MeO-tryptamine, 5-HO N-methyltryptamine. It has DMT, and then now, based on Schwelm's paper, they have detected 6-HO and 7-HO isomers of 5-MeO-DMT. And what they say more specifically is they've detected 2 different HO isomers of 5-MeO-DMT. So 2 different hydroxylated hydroxylated versions of 5-MeO-DMT. And for even further into the science on that is that what they're proving is that the P450 hydroxylase enzyme in the toad has the capacity and ability and desire to hydroxylate, but at the 6 and 7 position, just because of how the toad is made. And so the argument for this is that it's been proven, and it's in peer-reviewed science. And so what's beautiful about this is this can point to the possibility and the likelihood of the PSIH enzyme hydroxylating successfully a 5-methoxy dimethyltryptamine molecule. Wow, what a beautiful discovery. And so the question here is that because we have evidence of the toad's PSIH hydroxylating, can the mushroom's PSIH hydroxylate as well? Yes, it absolutely can. And yeah. So, and this is obviously proven by the 5-methyl DMT that has been created by another organization, and they successfully pulled off this experiment and are currently studying it as we speak. And so, in all of these conversations, it's like, okay, what's the question is, what do these things feel like? Like, what is the experience like? We talked a lot about the science, and the key here in the science conversation is, what other tryptamines can you play with? And I would argue that if you're growing and playing with mushrooms, do it all. Like, just play with it. It's an exciting way to play with the ingredients in the soil, and you can say this akin to other plants that are used, like cannabis, which we can add different things to fertilize and optimize the growing procedure, and it can actually change how the different active constituents are created and produced, and what concentrations. So, we've talked about DET, DMT. There's also DIPT, so 4-HO-DIPT that's been made. I'm not going to go too deep into talking about that. And then there's 5-MeO-DMT that's been added, which is created psilomethoxin, or 4-HO-5-MeO-DMT. And when we talk about the whole toad exudate, this creates a multi-substrate cascade, right? Because not only is there 5-MeO-DMT in the exudate, which has been measured at 41% by Schwelm, but there's also bufotenine, 5-HO N-methyltryptamine, 5-MeO-tryptamine, which is mexamine, and then DMT and 5-MeO-tryptophan. There's several other substituted tryptamines in the toad that the PSIH enzyme will act upon. And so it's creating many different possible combinations. And the experiences are, well, we're going to find out. We're doing lots of different experiments to understand how these compounds feel in the body. And I can attest personally to the experiences of adding DMT to the substrate of a mushroom, which increases the potency significantly and brings the mushroom experience almost into that of like a DMT realm. I don't know if you've worked with DMT, it's a very short acting, fast acting, highly sensorizing, if that's a word, um, creates like visual wow, and also takes you completely can take you completely out of the body and into this completely altered state beyond the realm of the here and now, and into another dimension. And with the mushrooms being doped with DMT, increasing their potency, you're getting a 4-hydroxylated DMT, which the 4-hydroxy group actually increases the ability for this compound to pass through the blood-brain barrier. So it's going to have a higher impact on your receptor than your traditional DMT, which does pass through the blood-brain barrier, although at a lower rate. And so, and the argument can be made that this experience is very unique, and I'm very interested to see if there's any clinical or observational studies that are tied in with increasing the psilocin production and getting to that really powerful altered state. Akin, they're doing this with DMTX, going long extended states, and it's typically like intravenous or intramuscular injections, and they're keeping people in this states for long periods of time. And I'm always wondering, is there a natural way to do this? And I'll get just a touch into other alternative methods of routes of administration, just around DMT and things like that, based around our sacraments. So you can kind of get an idea around that. And then, of course, we're talking psilomethoxin experientially. And so classic DMT, psilocin, psilocybin, these are very visually stimulating. They create auditory, visual, textural hallucinations. So textural experiences that aren't here in the present world, but also you can actually feel them. So it's actually stimulating your receptor, so you're feeling things that are being created and generated within or without in some other dimension that's being funneled into our present now. And what they're saying, the evidence of this is directly related to its ability to agonize or bind with the serotonin 2A receptor. And with psilomethoxin, because it is hydroxylated and 4-hydroxylated and 5-methoxylated, what it's going to be doing is splitting and stimulating both receptors. But because this is going into the 2A receptor with the 5-methoxy group, it actually attenuates that receptor. And so what we have is evidence of a cooling off or a reduction in activity at that site. Very interesting, because with individuals that have vigilance or anxiety or other energizing experience that can create some difficulty, it actually lowers that vigilance, that lowers that state of awareness into a state of acceptance, while simultaneously agonizing, stimulating the 1A receptor, the serotonin 1A receptor. And why this is important is because when you bind with that receptor, when that receptor is activated, it actually reduces your blood pressure, reduces your heart rate, circulatory rate, increases a sense of calm, of presence, and enables one to be fully here without the rumination, without the other things. If you think of it like one receptor is increasing your ability to change and adapt and evolve, and the other receptor is increasing your ability to accept and to settle and to be. So playing with both of these is very interesting and very exciting to me because it allows us to think about what if we can create balance in the system, right? Some of these things are like overdoing this or overdoing that, but really what we want is balance within the system. So then we can, in our life, be as expressive and explosive and as uh, present as possible. When we have all these things are going on in our consciousness, it makes things difficult to be present. So, um, yeah, it's quite interesting to go through some of these experiments and learn, firsthand and through some of the research how our bodies and our minds are reacting to these different psychedelic compounds. And I'll end on the note that we talk a lot about like hallucinogenics, psychedelics, et cetera. And I think it's an important conversation to have as in the psychedelic effect, like the effect of these things. And right now, there's a lot of talk about companies with like we'll call them non-psychedelic or non-hallucinogenic neuroplastogens, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the beauty here is that 5-MeO-DMT is already non-hallucinogenic, and we can call it a neuroplastogen because it's making us neuroplastic. And well, at the same time, Psilomethoxin takes it one step further because what it's capable of is creating that non-hallucinogenic neuroplastogen-like effect, but also attenuating the activity in the receptor that's responsible for excitement and vigilance. So for duration, we can be calm, we can be set, we can be present, and allow things to transform naturally around us. Um, yeah. So, this is a lot, and I tried my best to kind of like squeeze some of this, I would say like very dense information into just highlights of this. And there's so much more other information that can be shared here. And I'm sure as the weeks go on, we'll get into more distilled conversations around these individual um, substances, so that way you can have a really really clear informed pathway should you decide to explore them. So today we talked about DET, DMT, 5-MeO DMT, 5-ME DMT, and any of the tryptamines that are in those in the cascades of those are able to be uh, added to mushrooms to create some doped and interesting mushrooms. So if you have ever done any experiments like this, um, write it all down, send it to us. We'd love to talk about it. And if you have interest in sharing verbally some of these things, we are interested in having conversations around that with any of you who have something to say. We've done a lot of content, produced our own stuff, and the invitation here is to bring you on if you want, if you're feeling up to it, and to talk about some of your experiments. I'd love to go deep down the rabbit hole, and I'm sure some others here at the church would love to have conversations with you that we can provide more value to this community, more value to humanity, and help us to, have an interesting time along the way of us becoming more whole, more rad. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining me in this presentation, and don't or please remember that when you approach these substances, when you approach any mind altering substances, just have a safety plan in place. Let someone know and remove anything harmful from your environment, and please come and find us on School. If you haven't found us there yet, School is our community where we're active. People are active, talking about different various topics, getting support, adding ways to explore, to expand, good jujus. And we have a calendar of events there, which can inform you on the different and upcoming events that we can connect on. And yeah, and then obviously follow our content on any of the platforms. We really appreciate all that you do. We really appreciate all that you are and that you showed up. So, thank you again. And we hope to see you on April 26th at our Jaguar Light Wand ceremony. And with that, I appreciate you and peace.